and nourishes various evil actions. What is shamelessness, anapatrapia? Its nature is that of disregarding the world and exalting violence and evil. Its activity is that of obstructing shame and producing and nourishing evil actions, that is, because he who is without regard for the world exalts violence and evil and is unashamed of his transgressions, obstructs shame, and produces and nourishes various evil actions.
Being unashamed of transgressions is the common characteristic of both lack of conscience and shamelessness, and for that reason, the holy teachings conventionally speak of it as their substance. If you take shamelessness as the distinct characteristic of the two, then there must be no difference in the substance of the two. Consequently, these two dharmas must not occur simultaneously, because feeling, conceptualization, etc., do not have this meaning of identity of characteristics. If it is held that the difference between the two is based on self, as the basis for lack of conscience, and others, as the basis for lack of shame, then they must not really exist, which contradicts the holy teachings. If you concede that these two are real but arise separately, you contradict the aGiTaTION, which says that both are found in all evil minds.
When minds are not good, whatever the object may be, all have a disregard for good and exalt evil. Therefore these two dharmas are both found, simultaneously, in all evil minds. The objects are not different, and there is no error of separate occurrences. However, as for various holy teachings speaking of disregarding self and others, this is because self and dharma is referred to as self and world is called other, or, it may be because here, disregarding good and exalting evil is called self and others, with reference to benefit or harm to oneself. As for the treatise also saying that lack of conscience and shamelessness are part of craving, etc., it is a mode of those passions but not the same nature.
What is agitation, aGiTaTION? Its nature is that of preventing the mind from being calm with respect to objects. Its activity is that of obstructing indifference and meditative tranquility, Samatha. There is an interpretation that agitation is categorized as a part of craving, because a treatise says that it is part of craving and because it is born as a result of the memory of former happy events. Another interpretation is that agitation is not just categorized as craving, because a treatise says that agitation is found in all defiled minds. Also, the characteristic of agitation is lack of calm, because it is said that lack of calm is characterized as the common characteristic of all passions, and agitation has no distinct characteristic apart from this common characteristic of lack of calm. Even though it is conventionally established on the basis of its presence in all the passions, it increases with the presence of craving and is said, for that reason, to be a part of craving.
According to one interpretation, agitation has a separate nature of its own and is found in all defiled minds, like unfaith, etc. The texts do not say that its substance is not real because it is a part of another, because it must not be that unbelief, etc., which are also parts of another, are also conventionally existent. Also, as for the treatises also saying that it exists conventionally, like drowsiness, etc., this is said with reference to the characteristics of another, dharma. The specific characteristic of agitation is said to be excitement, because it causes dharmas that are born with it to be uncalm. If it does not have this separate characteristic apart from the passions, the texts must not say specifically that it obstructs meditative tranquility. Therefore, non-calm is not its specific characteristic.
What is torpor, sthana? Its nature is that of causing the mind to be unfit with regard to an object. Its activity is that of obstructing serenity and meditative insight, vipassana. According to one interpretation, torpor is categorized as a part of delusion, because a treatise only says that it is a part of delusion and because torpid dullness and sinking heaviness are characteristics of delusion. According to another interpretation, torpor is not just categorized as a part of delusion, that is, because unfitness is the characteristic of torpor, and all passions are unfitness. Apart from this unfitness, there is no separate characteristic of torpor. Even though it is conventionally established on the basis of its presence in all passions, it increases as a characteristic of delusion, and so the texts only speak of it as a part of delusion.
There is an interpretation that torpor has its own separate self-nature. Even though it is called a part of delusion and is a mode of the latter, like unfaith, etc., it is not categorized as delusion. It is said to exist conventionally in accordance with its dependence on the characteristic of another, i.e., delusion, and, like drowsiness, etc., it is a really existing nature. The specific characteristic of torpor is obscurity and dullness, because it causes dharmas that are born with it to be unfit. If, apart from the passions, there is no specific characteristic of torpor, the texts should not specifically say that it obstructs meditative insight. Therefore, unfitness is not the specific characteristic of this torpor.
The difference in characteristics of torpor and delusion is that the characteristic of delusion is a deluded blindness concerning an object, and it directly obstructs non-delusion and is not obscurity and dullness. The characteristic of torpor is obscurity and dullness concerning an object, and it directly obscures serenity and is not deluded blindness. What is unbelief, asraddha? Its nature is that of mental foulness as non-acquiescence, non-enjoyment, and non-desire concerning realities, virtues, and abilities. Its activity is that of obstructing pure belief and acting as the support of laziness, because the faithless one is often indolent. The three characteristics of unbelief oppose belief, you should know. However, each of the defiled dharmas has a specific characteristic. Only the specific characteristic of this unbelief is pollution that then pollutes the other mind and mental activities, just as an extremely polluted thing pollutes itself and then pollutes others. For this reason, it is said that its nature is that of mental foulness. As a consequence of unbelief, one does not acquiesce in, enjoy, or desire realities, virtues, and abilities, but they are not its separately existing natures. If there is false acquiescence, enjoyment, and desire with regard to other matters, those are the causes and results of unbelief, not its own nature.
What is indolence, kasidya? Its nature is that of reluctance to cultivate the good and eliminate evil. Its activity is that of obstructing vigor and increasing defilement, that is, because the indolent person nourishes defilement. He who is diligent with respect to defiled dharmas is also called indolent because he shuts out good dharmas. Because the person who is diligent with respect to indeterminate dharmas neither progresses nor regresses concerning the good, it is, in this case, desire or resolve, and note of separately existing nature, just as acquiescence in, enjoyment of, and desire for the indeterminate is neither pure nor defiled, neither faith nor faithlessness. What is negligence, pramda? Its nature is that of laxity in being incapable of guarding against defilement and cultivating purity. Its activity is that of obstructing vigilance and acting as the support of increasing evil and injuring the good. That is, it is generally called negligence because, as a result of indolence, along with craving, hatred, and delusion, one is unable to guard against defilement and cultivate the good dharmas. It does not have a separate substance. Although conceit, doubt, etc., also have this ability, compared with those four, their power is very weak in obstructing the three roots of good and the universally stimulating dharma of vigor. The characteristic of this, negligence, can be investigated in the same way as vigilance.
What is forgetfulness, musafasmrti? Its nature is that of an inability to remember clearly various objects that one experiences. Its activity is that of obstructing correct memory and acting as a support for distraction, that is, he who is forgetful is mentally distracted, siddhaviksipta. There is an interpretation that forgetfulness is a part of memory, because it is said that it is memory associated with the passions. According to another interpretation, forgetfulness is a part of delusion, because the aGiTaTION Sastra says that it is part of delusion. Delusion causes loss of memory and is therefore called forgetfulness. There is an interpretation that it is categorized as a part of both memory and delusion, because the former two passages, from treatises, are ambiguous and terse, and the aGiTaTION Sastra says later that this forgetfulness is found in all defiled minds.
What is distraction, viksipa? Its nature is that of causing the mind to wander from its objects. Its activity is that of obstructing correct samadhi and acting as the support for bad discernment, kuprajna, that is, because the distracted person exhibits bad discernment. There is an interpretation that distraction is a part of delusion, because the aGiTaTION Sastra says that it is part of delusion. According to another interpretation, distraction is categorized as craving, hatred, and delusion, because the Abhidharma-samaka and other texts say that it is tripartite. When it is said that it is a part of delusion, it is because it is found in all defiled minds. It is said that craving, hatred, and delusion surpass other dharmas in causing the mind to wander, and therefore they are said to be distraction.
There is an interpretation that distraction has its own separate substance. When it is said that it is tripartite, these are its modes, nisyanda, just as lack of conscience, etc., is, according to Samai. It is not categorized as the same as that, and it is called conventionally existing, according to its characteristics. The specific characteristic of distraction is precisely turbulence, because it causes dharmas born with it to wander. If it has no separate substance of its own apart from those three, craving, etc., it should not be specifically said that it